Hey everyone, and welcome back to our Bible study through each chapter of the Bible in 5 minutes. I think if you've been studying along with us, you know the drill. You can download all this information on our website for free at tobelikechrist.com in a nice PDF form. Links down in the description. Let's jump right in today. Genesis chapter 12. Let's ask the question, when did the events of this chapter take place? And I'll say that sometimes when we answer this question, when, it might actually be helpful to do this after you've done the overview of the chapter. That way you familiarize yourself with some of the characters and the events that are going on. But for the sake of going in order, we'll do it first. So when did the events of chapter 11, or rather chapter 12, take place? Well, using the date 1996 BC is the year that Abraham was born, we can calculate the year that Abram left Haran to go to Canaan, or to go to the promised land at God's instruction. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, according to verse 4, which means his journey started around 1921 BC. As far as our main characters, we've got a couple. Abram, he was the son of Terah. God promised to make Abram a great nation and to bless all of the nations of the earth through him and through his descendants. Abram was married to a woman named Sarai, and she's described by her husband as being very beautiful in appearance. Then we have Lot. Lot was Abram's nephew who traveled with him to Canaan. And then Pharaoh, which you probably know, that's the title of the ruler of the nation of Egypt. Geographically speaking, where did these events happen? Well, we've got a nice handy-dandy map to show you all the locations that I'm about to mention, so reference that on the PDF. At God's instruction, Abram traveled from Haran to Canaan. In Canaan, he visited a place called Shechem and the hill country east of Bethel. He then traveled south to the Negev, or the Negev, the southern region of Canaan. And due to a famine mentioned in verse 10, Abram left Canaan and he traveled further to the southwest, and he went to Egypt. And so now that you have all those details, let's try to fit them into the story of this chapter as we go through our outline. The first section, verses 1 through 9, God's blessing to Abram. And forgive me if I use Abram and Abraham interchangeably. It's just second nature, and I'm so used to calling him Abraham that sometimes Abram is hard to remember. God told Abram to leave Haran and to go down south to Canaan. God promised Abram that he would bless him, that he would make his descendants into a great nation, and to bless all the people of the earth through his children. Abram did as the Lord commanded him, and he took his household and his nephew Lot, and they all moved to Canaan. The company went to a place called Shechem, then Bethel, before continuing their journey south. And if you ever wondered why the story of the Bible centers around the Canaan land, or the land over there by Jerusalem and that area of the world, this is why. It's because this is the promised land that God promised to Abram all those years back, and he moved his family there because he had faith that God would give him that land. And that's where so much of the rest of the Bible takes place, and that's why. In our second section, Abram goes down to Egypt with his wife Sarai, verses 10 through 20. Due to a famine in Canaan, Abram decided that he was going to go down to Egypt. Now, Abram knew that his wife, Sarai, was a really beautiful woman. And because of this, he was afraid that the Egyptians would actually kill him in order to take his wife for themselves. So he told his wife to lie and say that she was his sister instead. When they met the Pharaoh of Egypt, he really admired and took a liking to Sarai, and so he took her into his house. For her sake, Pharaoh was very good to Abram, gave him gifts and livestock and servants, and Abram profited off of this. But God sent, quote, great plagues on the house of Pharaoh because he had taken another man's wife, even though he didn't know it. When Pharaoh finally realized what had happened and that he had been lied to about the true relationship between Abram and Sarai, he confronted Abram. And Pharaoh gladly gave Sarai back to Abram and sent them out of the land of Egypt. And so that is chapter 12. We have our first introduction to the Canaan land, and we have Abram traveling really all over the place. He certainly was not a guy who slowed down, even towards the end of his life. Let's talk about an application now as we close. God might be using you to lay the groundwork for a plan that he will bring to completion 2,000 years from now. Today is 2023, so that would be 4023 AD. Maybe God is using you to kickstart something that he's going to complete in 4023. That's a pretty incredible thought. Now, why do I say that? Well, the promise that was made to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, that God was going to bless all people through him and his descendants, that came to fruition 2,000 years later in Jesus, because Jesus was a descendant of Abraham's. He came through his family line, and he died on the cross for the sins of the world, therefore blessing all people. Abraham was a piece in a bigger story, and he wasn't even the most important piece in that story. But I think reading about his life and what God did through him, we shouldn't forget that we are also part of a bigger story. It's not our own story. It's not going to come to completion when our life ends, but it's God's story. The obedience that we give to God today may be the foundation of great blessings for future generations.